Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I drove 2 miles to get here in a gas-powered car, and last week I mowed my lawn. Jesus Christ. Why is it I feel so guilty about climate change? Was it my Catholic upbringing? Did watching the Lorax too young render me emotionally raw? Or could it be that I've swallowed a societal narrative telling me that we're all to blame for climate change? Because I can't fight this feeling that it's all my fault. I mean, I too drive car, and cook with stove, and sometimes I even wear shirt.
Now, this is a very typical message. This is Jam on Twitter, speaking for many, many people. Everything these Stop Oil protesters wear or buy was manufactured using oil. The clothes that you're wearing owe their existence to oil.
What do you mean, just stop oil? All your stuff is made out of oil, you idiots. Your clothes. This makes no sense at all.
So I shouldn't suggest we solve climate change as long as I insist on wearing shirts. Because climate change is supposedly the fault of anyone who hasn't joined some kind of nudist commune. But how did this line of thinking get so common? Well, it turns out that one source of these arguments is fossil fuel industry propaganda. This is Cool It, Bud, how oil and gas use big money to make us feel like tiny little bad boys, and not the good kind of bad boys either. For the last half a century, fossil fuel companies have spent billions on public relations to maintain a positive public image. Even as climate change inches us towards what scientists are calling quite the ruckus. Through a constant barrage of commercials, digital ads, sponsorships, public displays, press releases, and so-called advertorials, they've shifted responsibility for climate change away from themselves and onto consumers. Something to be solved with a couple energy-efficient light bulbs or something. In 2018, a lawyer defending oil and gas companies from a climate lawsuit argued, it's not the production and extraction of oil that's driving these emissions, it's the energy use. It's the way people are living their lives. In other words, we know it seems like this might be our fault, but what if it was actually y'all's fault? You, the consumer. Meanwhile, their internal communications recognize climate change as an upstream problem caused by fossil fuel supply. And yet this argument really seems to pop off in America, where we love rugged individualism, self-reliance, and bootstraps. It frames climate change as a personal moral choice, and one that every one of us is failing. This is best illustrated by BP's Beyond Petroleum media campaign, which is solely responsible for popularizing the idea of a personal carbon footprint.
What size is your carbon footprint?
The carbon footprint. How much carbon I produce. Is that it?
Between 2004 and 2006, they paid PR giants Ogilvy and Mather over $100 million a year to shift blame away from BP and onto consumers, and it was wildly successful. They even created a web-based carbon footprint calculator to make people measure just how guilty we should feel about climate change. But this all conveniently ignores their massive campaign to convince the public that climate change wasn't a problem, alongside obscene election spending and lobbying to block any serious climate policy from passing. And through this bullshit and fuckery, they've delayed the energy transition we need, locking us into an oil and gas economy, and restricting consumer choices to fossil fuels all the way, baby. So I decided to test out their carbon footprint calculator to see if BP had changed their approach over the years. going on, man? Nothing. But messaging around individual behaviors has actually been shown to discourage people from taking action. Telling us to solve climate change by ourselves makes us feel hopeless because it feels way too big for any of us alone to make a difference. And when we're made to see ourselves as only consumers, we lose sight of all the agency we have to bring real societal change. And finally, this framing is meant to delegitimize climate activists, trapping them with an accusation of hypocrisy that's impossible to escape. And these ad campaigns are state-of-the-art propaganda, developed with the world's best PR experts. And with no real counterweight to this propaganda, with nearly the same funding, it's been extremely effective. In 1982, the Mobil of ExxonMobil bragged they had molded the collective unconscious of the public to view the industry favorably. You know, one of those cool and normal things to say. And since then, these bootstrap narratives have spread far and wide. Yale, for instance, refuses to divest from oil and gas because they say it's consumption of fossil fuels and not production that causes climate change. Republicans' 2020 policy agenda said, fossil fuels aren't the enemy, it's emissions. Even the Paris Agreement contains no mention of fossil fuels. Yes, the ones that cause climate change. So back to our pal who thinks that protesters should be nude.
Makes no sense at all.
How does this everyman even know that polyester is derived from oil products? That's not something I ever knew or thought about growing up.
Girl, that fit is gas.
Well, yes. It's polyester, which is made from natural gas and oil. So it is gas. Literally.
Right then, so without knowing it, he's regurgitating fossil fuel industry talking points that they spent billions to jam into our thick domes. Only to be vomited out from the collective unconscious that BP and friends so carefully hijacked. And these arguments spread like the wildfires they facilitate because they're constructed by the best PR firms on earth, and because technically, there's a nugget of truth to them. Yes, we all use oil and gas. And all of us should try to reduce our footprint. Absolutely. See, effective propaganda relies on clever framing instead of outright lies, calling attention to some truths while obscuring others. In this case, that oil and gas are actively preventing progress. But let's bring these arguments to their logical end. Putting aside climate change as caused by burning fossil fuels, making polyester kind of aside the point, this argument says, you're trying to change something about the world we live in, and yet you yourself live in that world. Curious. But we're all stuck in a system where avoiding fossil fuels isn't practically possible. We didn't choose to build cities that require a car to get anywhere. We can't take a train over a flight if the rail line doesn't exist yet. And we don't get to choose what powers our grids. Lots of emissions are baked into our limited consumer choices because of decisions made without us. I don't want oil in my shirts, but it's hard for me to influence how clothing companies make them. We need to transition away from oil and gas. And most of us would choose a greener option if it were available, clearly marked, and cost competitive. But we need policy to push whole industries to make that happen. And you and I are not the ones blocking policy. To illustrate this another way, let's imagine for a moment we're in ancient Rome. Our water from the aqueducts is distributed through networks of lead pipes, despite some early signs that lead might be harmful to human health. Now a pesky band of activists called Just Stop Lead starts protesting lead pipes for drinking water. So the powerful lead industry, who only knows how to make money from selling lead pipes, starts running ads saying, "You owe your drinking water to lead companies. You wouldn't be able to drink water or even piss or shit without us. No, without us, you would all die of thirst. Oh, by the way, stop giving yourself lead poisoning, shitheads. F*** you." And then Piers Morgan hosts a Just Stop Lead activist and says, "You protest lead and yet you drink water from their pipes. Isn't that hypocritical?" They'd probably say, well, yeah, I'd prefer not to, but today that's where the water comes from, and I'm not the f***ing plumber. Very well, we'll be right back after a quick commercial break. After a long day on the battlefield, a Roman can work up a mean thirst. And nothing tames a wicked thirst like cracking open a cold chalice with the fellas. A big full chalice of aqua. And all the water you know and love was brought to you by the hard-working folks at Roman Lead. who forged 300 miles of long, hard pipes that pierced through the heart of this city, pumping water through its veins and arteries straight into your mouth. So next time you're riding out the heat of a game day, sipping on a cold agua, know you've got Roman lead to thank. 'Cause Rome runs on lead, the only way to get water. Roman lead. Get your lead in the game. Paid for by the Roman Lead Institute. But how can we fight for the transition? Reducing your own footprint is a great place to start. I'm not saying we can just sit around and wait for those in power to fix the problem. And this transition will require lifestyle changes from all of us. What I am saying is individual actions alone will never be enough to solve this, and we can be so much more powerful when we get organized and take collective action. For starters, let's look at the central role PR firms play in giving oil and gas a social license to operate. Ogilvy, the rascals behind the carbon footprint, still have the most fossil fuel contracts of any PR firm today, despite the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change saying these ads are actively derailing climate solutions. So if you know anyone who works in PR or advertising, your climate action is connecting them to Clean Creatives, a great organization that helps folks in these agencies to get them to refuse new contracts with fossil fuel clients, something many firms have already committed to. Clean Creatives publishes an annual F list of all the firms that still have fossil fuel contracts, and many of them are active on social media, fluffing up their own public image. So I've written a guidebook linked in the description with links to accounts of the worst offenders. So for those who don't work in advertising or PR, click through it, give them a follow, and when you see them post, especially about sustainability, ask why they're still working with fossil fuel clients. And based on engagement in most of their posts, it wouldn't take many of us to get noticed. There will be a point when working with oil and gas is considered unacceptable, just like we saw with cigarette ads years back. So let's speed that up a little bit, shall we? And remember, we don't need to be perfect activists to push for a better world. Because all we can do in the oil and gas economy of today is wake up each day and do whatever we can to fight for a better tomorrow. Because we can do so much more than they want us to believe. So let's prove that.